I was finished. Completely and utterly finished. For nearly 2 decades, I had strutted through life brandishing the prestigious title of the youngest son of the Shin family, acting like a tyrant and making countless enemies along the way. I had lived a life of unbridled arrogance, secure in the knowledge that my family's wealth and influence were an impenetrable shield. But now, the universe had decided to play a cruel, twisted joke on me. The sudden revelation had shattered my world. I was a fake. I had been switched at birth. Although Mom and Dad had graciously told me to stay, insisting that nothing would change and that I was still their son, I knew better. I couldn't bear to stay a moment longer. The atmosphere in the house had shifted, the air thick with unspoken truths. My older brother, Paul, was currently away on a business trip overseas. He likely hadn't heard the news yet. But the moment he found out, I was certain he would kick me out onto the street without a second thought. After all, Paul had never liked me. Since we were children, he had made it abundantly clear that I was a nuisance. He had told me, more than once, that he wished I wasn't his brother. I could handle the loss of the money, the status, and the luxury cars. What terrified me to my very core was the identity of the real son. The true heir to the family fortune was none other than Julian. Julian, the boy I had tormented. The boy I had treated like a commodity. The boy who was my ex-boyfriend, whom I had dumped only recently. I had bought his affection with money, occupied his rightful place in the world for 18 years, and then humiliated him with a breakup fee. I couldn't even begin to imagine the retribution that awaited me. If Paul and Julian joined forces, I would be crushed like an ant. I had to pack my bags and run. I had to disappear before the grim Reaper himself, Paul, returned home. As I frantically threw clothes into a suitcase, my mind drifted back to the beginning of my disaster with Julian. Our first meeting had been anything but a fairy tale. Julian was a purchase I had made during my freshman year of college. He possessed an ethereal quality, a handsome face that stood out in any crowd like a crane among chickens. On the very first day of school, he had been crowned the unspoken king of the campus. The confessions wall on social media was plastered with his photos, and the line of people waiting to profess their love to him was endless. Yet, no one had ever succeeded. Julian was cold, aloof, and solitary. To him, nothing seemed to matter except his studies and his endless string of part-time jobs. At that time, I was young, foolish, and blissfully unaware of the consequences of my actions. I made a bet with my friends. The wager was simple. Whoever could conquer the unreachable Julian would win the new limited edition sports car that had just hit the market. I had been coveting that car for months. I needed it. My obsession was fueled by desperation because Paul, in a fit of rage over my last drag racing incident, had confiscated all my vehicles. He had grounded me for months, froze my credit cards, and banned me from buying any new toys. His control was absolute. I cursed him silently in my heart, calling him a control freak, but I had no choice but to submit to his tyranny. But I was determined to get that car. I scoured the internet for courtship strategies, memorizing pickup lines and romantic gestures. None of them worked on Julian. He treated me as if I were invisible. In the beginning, he would offer a polite, cold rejection. "Excuse me, you're blocking the way," he would say. Eventually, his patience wore thin, and his politeness evaporated. "Get lost," he would snap, his eyes filled with disdain. I was furious. My pride was wounded. In a fit of pique, I gathered a group of my wildest friends and headed to a high-end club, determined to drown my sorrows in expensive liquor and prove that I didn't care. When I invited my friend Lucas, he looked at me as if I had grown a second head. He waved his hands frantically in refusal. "There is no way I am going to a club with you," Lucas said, his eyes wide with genuine fear. "The last time we went out, we hadn't even sat down before your brother stormed in." His face was blacker than a thunderhead. He looked like the Grim Reaper. I had nightmares for a week. Another friend, Mike, chimed in, nodding vigorously. "Your brother protects you like you're a rare jewel, Kyle. When you crashed your car last time, he nearly demolished the entire racetrack." I'd heard rumors that he had a brother complex, but I didn't realize it was terminal. I fell silent, wanting to argue, but I couldn't find the words to defend Paul. Was he really that scary? I wasn't sure. The employees at his company called him the cold-faced Hades. They said that just having him stand in a room was more effective than air conditioning. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his tongue was sharper than a scalpel. I had visited his office several times and seen secretaries weeping in the break room, their makeup ruined after a dressing down from him. To be fair, Paul was objectively handsome. He was tall, with sharp features and an aura of competence that was undeniable. Initially, many people at his company had crushed on him, their hearts fluttering whenever he spoke. But after working with him, those hearts broke, and the fluttering died a sudden death. He was a romance vacuum. My mother worried constantly that he would die alone. She had even researched the concept of homosexuality, agonized over it for weeks, and finally resigned herself to the possibility. She had spent half a month mentally preparing herself and another month preparing Paul, telling him that even if he brought a man home, she wouldn't object. After all, she had me to carry on the family line. Or so she thought. I snapped back to the present moment in the club. My friends were still refusing to join me. I promise you, I pleaded, raising my hand in a vow. Paul is in another city on business. There is absolutely zero chance he will show up today. He doesn't have time to monitor my every move. Reluctantly, after my repeated assurances, they agreed. We arrived at the club, ready for a night of debauchery, only to run straight into Julian. He was working there as a server. He wore a simple uniform, a cheap white shirt that somehow looked like a tailored masterpiece on his frame. He stood there, wiping a table, and yet he drew the gaze of everyone in the room. In the dim light, I suddenly noticed that his brow and eyes bore a striking resemblance to Paul's. Lucas noticed me staring and nudged me with a suggestive wink. You like him? I lowered my voice and told Lucas about the bet. He paused, stunned, then gave me a thumbs up. You city kids really know how to play, he whispered. Then, raising his voice, he called out to the manager. Hey, send that waiter in here to pour drinks for us. The manager looked hesitant. He knew who we were, rich, spoiled second-generation heirs, and he dared not offend us. But he also seemed protective of his staff. Sir, the manager stammered, his face paling. Julian doesn't. He doesn't do that kind of service. He's not for sale. Lucas turned red, slamming his hand on the table. I said we're just drinking. Just pouring alcohol. I'm not looking for a hookup. The manager bowed continuously, apologizing as he backed out of the room to fetch Julian. But the moment the door clicked shut, my phone rang. The screen lit up with a single name, Paul. Quiet. I hissed at everyone, waving my hands frantically. The music was cut, and the room fell into a deathly silence. I answered the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. Hello. Are you at the Midnight Club? Paul's voice came through the speaker, cold and distorted by the sound of wind rushing past, as if he were in a speeding car. My stomach dropped. How did he know? I tried to laugh it off. What? No way. I lied, my voice trembling slightly. I'm already in bed. I'm about to go to sleep. Paul chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. Really? Because I can hear your breathing, Kyle. I heard the rustle of fabric on his end, followed by a warning that sounded like a demon whispering in my ear. I will be home in 10 minutes. If I don't see you there, you will face the consequences. The line went dead with a soft click. I looked at my friends, my face pale. He knows. Their faces drained of color. Go, Lucas screamed. Get out of here. And don't you dare sell us out, or he'll break our legs too. They knew that Paul didn't mind them partying, but leading me astray was a capital offense. If Paul found out that the same crew who encouraged my drag racing was now taking me to clubs, he would skin them alive. I ran out of the room, bumping into Julian in the hallway. He looked at me with confusion, his lips parting as if to speak, but I didn't have time. I brushed past him without a word, sprinting for the exit. I spent the rest of the night sitting on my bed, trembling, waiting for the sound of a car engine in the driveway. It never came. I sat there until dawn broke, realizing with a surge of fury that Paul had bluffed me. He wasn't coming home. He had just tricked me into behaving. I was furious, but powerless. In my impotent rage, I marched into his study and poured a pitcher of water into his prized potted plant. I had already drowned a dozen of his money trees this way. It was my only form of rebellion. As the deadline for the bet approached, my friends began to mock me. Driven by ego and frustration, I decided to go for broke. I marched into the university, found Julian in an empty classroom, and cornered him. I slammed my hand against the wall behind him, trapping him. With my other hand, I grabbed the hem of his shirt, pinning him between my body and the wall. He was a head taller than me, making the posture slightly ridiculous, but I didn't care. I looked up at him, struck once again by how much he resembled Paul. It was uncanny. It felt like they should be the brothers. Julian seemed bewildered by my sudden aggression. The shock in his eyes hadn't yet faded as he stood there, letting me manhandle him. He smelled faintly of jasmine detergent. His clothes were washed until the fabric was white and thin, with visible patches, yet on him, it looked like high fashion. I hated him. I hated that he had such a perfect face and body while having nothing else. The other students in the room were stunned into silence. They knew my reputation as a rich bully, so no one dared to intervene. The air was thick with tension. I tilted my head, trying to look menacing, and stared into his dark eyes. 50,000, I declared, my voice echoing in the quiet room. I'll give you $50,000 to be my boyfriend. Julian blinked, snapping out of his daze. He lifted his eyelids, giving me a cold, dismissive look. He didn't say a word. His silence and the fierce look in his eyes startled me. I stumbled, my hand slipping from the wall and landing squarely on his stomach. Under the thin fabric, I felt the rock-hard ridges of an 8-pack. Honestly, I was scared. I had seen Julian fight before. He had taken on 4 guys at once, his fists moving like pistons, beating them until they were looking for their teeth on the pavement. I wanted to pull my hand away, but my brain short-circuited. Instinct took over, and I squeezed. The muscle was dense and firm. Nice, I thought. Then reality crashed back in. I had lost face. Panic set in, and I started babbling. "Don't be ungrateful," I shouted, my voice cracking. "A young master like me taking an interest in you is a blessing. You should be on your knees thanking me, not looking at me with those dead eyes." Julian remained silent for a long time. His jaw clenched, the muscle feathering under the skin. His breathing grew heavy. Just as I thought he was going to punch me or tell me to go to hell, he spoke. "Okay." I froze. "What?" I said okay, he whispered. The tips of his ears turned a suspicious shade of red. Before I could process his agreement, his voice, slightly hoarse, came from above my head. "How long do you intend to keep groping me?" I yelped and jumped back, straightening my spine. My hands were shaking as I pulled a bank card from my pocket and slammed it onto his desk. "Pin is 6 zeros. I yelled, then turned and fled the room. I later learned the truth. Julian hadn't agreed because of my charm. He agreed because his grandmother was in the hospital, and he was desperately short on the surgical fees. His part-time jobs barely covered his own living expenses, let alone a major operation. But none of that mattered to me then. Before I could even get the sports car I had won, Paul found out about the bet. He dragged me into his study and lectured me for hours. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his long, pale fingers resting on the withered leaves of the plant I had drowned. I nodded every 3 seconds, letting his words flow in one ear and out the other, wondering which of my so-called friends had snitched on me. I was terrified of Paul. When his face went dark, my knees had a Pavlovian reaction to buckle. He was 25, a golden bachelor, yet he lived like a monk. No dating, no parties. His only hobbies were working and controlling my life. Our irresponsible parents had dumped the company and me into his lap and fled the country for an endless vacation. Paul sighed, a sound of deep frustration. He took off his gold-rimmed glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at me with his beautiful, terrifying phoenix eyes for a long moment, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. "I heard you're in a relationship," he asked. His voice was like mint soaked in glacial water, colder even than Julian's. I stammered, nodding. "Yes. But we're breaking up soon." The air pressure in the room plummeted. Paul pressed his lips into a thin line. He didn't speak, but the friction of his thumb against his index finger told me he was displeased. I assumed he was angry that I was dating a man, or perhaps that I was distracted from my studies. I decided internally that the bet wasn't worth this. I would let Julian keep the $50,000 as a severance package. "If you fail another class this semester," Paul said suddenly, breaking the silence, "don't expect a single cent of allowance. You will ride that rusty bicycle to school every day." "No," I screamed. "The villa is halfway up a mountain. It will take me half a lifetime to pedal there. And without money, how will I eat?" Paul Paul ignored my wailing. He grabbed me by the scruff of my neck and threw me out of the study. I clung to his doorframe, crying fake tears, but he was unmoved. As I was dragged away, I heard the cleaning lady whisper, "Look how close the brothers are. Just playing around. Asterisk close? We are about as close as a prisoner and his warden." Asterisk that night, I moved into the dorms. I couldn't risk Paul cutting my funding. But living in the dorms opened my eyes to a strange reality. My roommates, Chris and Alex, were strangely clingy. It wasn't until my other roommate, Ethan, whispered the truth to me that I realized they were a couple. Great, I thought. Gays everywhere. I couldn't judge, though. I had known since middle school that I liked men. The terrifying part was that the man in my awakening dreams had been Paul. That nightmare had scared me straight. Since then, I had lived in constant fear that he would see through me. So I acted out, played the rebel, and avoided him whenever possible. News of my relationship with Julian spread like wildfire. I wanted to break up with him, but the words stuck in my throat. It felt too cruel. I had bought him, used him for a week, and now I was dumping him? I was scum. Desperate to pass my classes and keep my allowance, I turned to my new boyfriend. "Here," I said, tossing a hotel room key onto Julian's desk in the library. "Go to this room tonight. Wait for me." Julian stiffened. He looked at the key card, his expression complicated. He didn't reach for it. "Don't look at me like that," I hissed. "I paid you. You have to do what I say." I left before he could argue. That night, I arrived at the hotel to find Julian waiting. He stood up when I entered, his ears burning red. He smelled faintly of alcohol. "Go wash up," I commanded, pushing him toward the bathroom. "Hurry up. Once you're clean, we start." Julian's voice was thick. "So fast." I haven't prepared myself." I looked at him, confused. I patted my backpack. "Prepared for what? I have everything we need right here. Just go shower." He went into the bathroom. I sat at the desk and pulled out the mountain of remedial homework Paul had assigned me. I stared at the papers, feeling my will to live drain away. "Hurry up," I shouted at the bathroom door. "If you don't come out soon, we're going to be doing this all night." The water stopped. 10 minutes later, Julian emerged. He was wearing a bathrobe, loosely tied, exposing a vast expanse of chest. Water dripped from his hair, tracing a path down his neck, over his collarbone, and disappearing into the robe. He looked incredible. I whistled. "Nice build. You should come to the gym with me sometime." He turned the color of a cooked shrimp. "Come here," I said, patting the chair next to me. "Teach me how to solve these. I can't leave until they're finished." Julian froze. He pointed a shaking finger at the pile of math worksheets. "This is what you wanted to do." "Yeah," I said, panic rising. "Don't tell me you don't know how to do them. Aren't you the top student?" He let out a breath that sounded like a mix of disappointment and relief. "I know how to do them." For the next few weeks, I dragged Julian to study sessions constantly. Rumors began to swirl that Julian, the fallen god, had sold his body to a rich idiot. They called him names on the forums. I usually ignored gossip, but when I saw a post written by a guy named Justin, Julian's academic rival, calling Julian a whore, I snapped. I hired a hacker to track the IP address. It was Justin. I went to the cafeteria where Julian was eating. I intended to tell him we were skipping studying that night, but I heard a sneering voice behind me. Well, if it isn't the scholar Julian. Eating common food now? I thought you only ate luxury meals provided by your sugar daddy." I turned around. It was Justin. I crooked my finger at him. "Come here." He stepped forward, confused. Julian immediately stood up, trying to block me, sensing violence. I pushed Julian aside, grabbed my bowl of rice, and slammed it upside down onto Justin's head. Before he could react to the hot food running down his face, I kicked him squarely in the chest. "I didn't hear what you were barking," I said coldly. "Say it again." Justin scrambled up, humiliated and enraged. "You disgusting homosexuals. Buying boys in college. You think you're special? Julian is just like his whore mother." Before I could move, a blur of motion shot past me. Julian flew at Justin, tackling him to the ground. They rolled around, fists flying. Julian was winning, pummeling Justin into the floor, but Justin kept screaming insults. "I'm going to rip your tongue out," I shouted, diving into the fray to help Julian. Suddenly, the cafeteria went silent. A shadow fell over us. I looked up and locked eyes with Paul. He stood there, flanked by the university president and his secretary. He was there to discuss a library donation. Instead, he found his brother in a brawl. Mr. Shun, the principal stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead. I am so sorry. We will handle this immediately. Paul didn't look at him. He stared straight at me. The pressure was suffocating. Julian stepped in front of me, wiping blood from his lip. I started the fight, he said firmly. Punish me. Leave him out of it. I pushed Julian aside. Paul, I whispered. Paul grabbed my wrist. His grip was like iron, threatening to crush my bones. We're leaving, he said. He dragged me away, but not before casting a look at Julian. A look of warning, and something else I couldn't decipher. Back home, I was locked in my room. Paul confiscated my phone. For 2 days, I stared at the wall. Finally, Paul entered. He handed me my phone. Break up with him, he said. There was no room for negotiation in his tone. That's not fair, I muttered. Do it. Under his glare, I sent the text. We're done. Julian didn't reply immediately. Then the messages started coming. Why? Is it because of your brother? I can explain. Don't leave me. I turned off my phone. 2 days later, my parents returned from their trip. They sat me down in the living room, their faces grave. Kyle, my father said, we have something to tell you. That was the moment my life ended. They told me about the hospital mix-up. They told me I wasn't their son. After they went to bed, leaving me in a state of shock, I sat in the dark living room. My phone buzzed. It was Julian again. Asterisk 3:00 a.m. Fine. I know you don't mean it. Wait for me. I'm coming to see you right now. Asterisk I leaped off the sofa. He was coming here? At 3 a.m.? Was he coming to kill me? I had humiliated him, used him, and dumped him. And now, I wasn't even the rich heir who could protect myself. I ran upstairs and packed my suitcase. I had to go. 10 minutes later, I was sneaking through the living room, lugging my heavy bag toward the front door. I reached for the handle, but the door swung open from the outside. Paul stood there. He looked disheveled. His hair was windblown, his tie was crooked, and his chest was heaving as if he had run a marathon. He stared at me, then at the suitcase behind me. His expression darkened instantly. Where do you think you're going? His voice was a low growl. I tried to shrink into the floorboards. He grabbed me by the collar and hauled me back into the house, throwing me onto the sofa. He loomed over me, his presence overwhelming. You knew, I whispered. You knew I wasn't your brother, didn't you? That's why you came back. To kick me out. Kick you out. Paul laughed, a terrifying sound. He leaned down, placing his hands on either side of my head, trapping me. Is that what you think? I'm going back to school, I squeaked. At 4 a.m, he sneered. Were you planning to dig a hole under the fence? Brother, please, I begged, pushing against his chest. You're scaring me. He caught my wrists and pinned them above my head. Don't call me brother, he hissed. I have no blood relation to you. My heart stopped. He really did know. I said. He repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper. I am not your brother. I know, I cried. I know I'm a fake. I'll leave. I won't bother you anymore. Paul closed his eyes, taking a deep shuddering breath. When he opened them, the anger was gone, replaced by an intensity that burned. You idiot. I've known for 5 years. I stopped struggling. What? 5 years ago, when you had your appendicitis surgery. I saw your blood type. It didn't match mom and dad's. I ran a DNA test. Why didn't you say anything? Because you were a teenager, he said softly. You were rebellious. If I told you then, you would have run away. I was afraid you'd starve to death on the street. He glanced at my suitcase. It seems my fears were justified. So, how did you find Julian? He's your ex-boyfriend, Paul said dryly. I investigate everyone around you. When I saw him, I suspected. I confirmed it recently. He pulled a contract from his pocket and dropped it on my lap. Read it. It was a debt repayment plan. Millions of dollars for 18 years of upbringing. You have 2 choices, Paul said, sitting back. 1, you leave, and you spend the rest of your life working off this debt. 2, you stay here, with me. Stay with you? I asked, confused. As my partner, he said. Romantically. I stared at him. Are you crazy? I'm a guy. I'm not blind, he retorted. But, I was your brother yesterday, and today you are not. I realized a long time ago that my feelings for you weren't brotherly. I thought I was sick. I went to therapy. But when I found out we weren't related, he trailed off, looking at me with a vulnerability I had never seen. I love you, Kyle. I have loved you for years. And just like that, under the threat of crippling debt and the confusing realization that my terrifying brother was actually in love with me, I agreed. The next day was chaos. In the morning, I became Paul's boyfriend. In the afternoon, Julian was brought to the house. Paul put his arm around my shoulder as Julian walked in. Julian, Paul said, his voice smooth and possessive. Let me introduce you. This is your sister-in-law, Kyle. You should know him. You went to school together. Julian's face went black. He stared at me, his eyes wide with betrayal. Sister-in-law, he choked out. Paul squeezed my shoulder. Answer him. I forced a smile. Hi, Julian. This was hell. My ex-boyfriend was now my brother-in-law. My brother was now my boyfriend. That night, I was trying to sleep in my room. Paul had graciously allowed me to stay in my own room for now, when the door creaked open. I felt the mattress dip. A warm body pressed against mine. Paul, I mumbled. No, a voice whispered. It's me. I snapped the bedside lamp on. Julian was lying next to me, tears streaming down his face. Kyle, he sobbed. Why him? Why my brother? I saw you together. It hurts so much. Julian, I hissed, shoving him. What are you doing? Get out. Why did you break up with me? He cried. Was it because I was poor? Now I'm rich. I'm the real son. We can be together properly. Get off me. Suddenly, the door flew open. Paul stood there, wearing silk pajamas, his face a mask of fury. Get away from him. Paul roared. He dragged Julian off the bed. The two of them, biological brothers who had just met that day, began to brawl on my bedroom floor. Stop it, I screamed, clutching my waist which was sore from Paul's earlier celebration of our new relationship. My mother appeared in the doorway, horrified. She ended the fight by slapping both of them. In the end, Julian was sent abroad to study, accompanied by our parents who wanted to bond with him. Paul and I stayed behind. 3 years later, I walked out of my final university class to find a familiar car waiting for me. It was the limited edition sports car, the one I had wanted all those years ago. Paul leaned against it, holding a massive bouquet of roses. He smiled at me, a genuine, warm smile that melted the Ice King persona entirely. He drove me to a hillside overlooking the city. Under a sky exploding with fireworks, he dropped to one knee. Kyle, he said, his eyes reflecting the starlight. Will you marry me? I rolled my eyes, fighting back tears. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a velvet box. Damn it, Paul. You always have to be first. I opened the box to reveal the ring I had bought for him. He laughed, sliding his ring onto my finger. I love you, he whispered. I love you too, brother, I teased. He kissed me, silencing the joke, as the fireworks turned the night into day.